Mia had taken the subway nearly every day of her life. There was something calming about the low hum of the train as it glided through the dimly lit tunnels beneath the city. It was a routine, a constant in her world that had recently spiraled into chaos. Her job was draining, her relationship falling apart, and her once vibrant life now felt like a series of bland, repetitive motions. The subway was the one place where she could clear her mind, where time seemed to stand still between stations. But tonight, something was different. The train ride that had always been her refuge now felt unnerving. She glanced at the other passengers, a middle-aged man with thick glasses scrolling through his phone, a young woman tapping her foot to music, an older woman with a wrinkled face gazing absently at the ceiling. The usual crowd. Yet something felt off. The train jerked to a stop, not at a station, but in the middle of the tunnel. The lights flickered briefly, casting the train in shadows before everything settled into silence. Mia looked at the digital map above the doors. No station was marked ahead. No announcement followed the sudden stop. "Great," Mia muttered under her breath, assuming it was a typical delay. She leaned her head back, expecting the train to start moving again in a few moments. It didn't. A minute passed, then two. The lights dimmed slightly, and Mia felt a cold draft creep along the floor of the train. She looked up, startled. The doors slid open with a hiss. No station platform awaited them. Instead, a narrow, dimly lit tunnel stretched ahead. The flickering lights on the ceiling barely illuminated the dirty, crumbling walls, and an icy fog clung to the ground, swirling in slow, unnatural patterns. "Is this a joke?" someone near the front of the car muttered. But no one moved. Mia's heart raced as she looked around at the others, expecting someone, anyone, to take the lead. The middle-aged man stood up, peering out into the dark tunnel. "Where are we?" Nobody knew. As Mia's eyes adjusted to the dim light, she realized something strange. The signs on the walls, smeared with dirt and grime, were written in symbols she couldn't understand, though they seemed eerily familiar. She stepped closer to the open door, hesitant. "Maybe we should wait for the train to start again," the young woman with headphones suggested, a nervous quiver in her voice. But the older woman stood up abruptly, shaking her head. "It won't. Not here." Everyone turned to stare at her. She had a hollow look in her eyes, her face pale under the dim lights. "This place," she said slowly, her voice barely more than a whisper, "isn't on any map." Mia felt a chill crawl down her spine. "What do you mean? What station is this?" The woman's lips trembled. "It's not a station. Not one you'll find on any map, anyway." The middle-aged man scoffed. "So what is it, then? Just some kind of abandoned stop?" The woman met his gaze, her eyes wide and hollow. "No," she whispered. "It's a trap." Before anyone could react, the train lurched violently, throwing everyone off balance. The doors slammed shut, trapping Mia and the others inside. The train sped off with a metallic screech, but something was wrong. The lights went out completely, and the sensation of movement stopped. It felt like they were suspended in space, disconnected from the physical world. Panic erupted. Someone banged on the doors. Others shouted for help. But Mia remained still, a sinking feeling settling deep within her chest. She wasn't sure why, but she knew the older woman was right. This place wasn't supposed to exist, and they were in far more danger than they could comprehend. Just as the chaos reached its peak, the train's lights flickered back on. But now the scene outside the windows had changed. They were no longer in the city. The train had stopped again, but this time, they were facing an empty, decrepit station that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. The name of the station was written on a sign hanging above, but the letters were smeared and unreadable. The only thing clear was the palpable sense of dread hanging in the air. Mia's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't alone in sensing it. Every single person in the car had gone silent, staring out into the eerie station, as if someone, was watching them from the shadows. Without warning, the doors hissed open again. "No!" The older woman screamed, "Don't go out there!" But it was too late. The middle-aged man, eyes wide with terror, bolted out of the train. He ran through the fog-covered platform, disappearing into the tunnel beyond before anyone could stop him. Moments later, a blood-curdling scream echoed back toward the train, followed by a sound that made Mia's skin crawl. The slow, deliberate footsteps of something large approaching from the darkness. The doors slammed shut again, sealing them in. No one dared to breathe as the footsteps drew closer. Whatever was out there, it was now circling the train, its presence heavy and menacing. The older woman started sobbing. "We're trapped," she whimpered. "We're all trapped." Mia's mind raced. There had to be a way out. There had to be something they could do. But the deeper they ventured into this strange, impossible station, the more Mia feared there was no escape. The train wasn't taking them to any known destination. It was taking them somewhere much worse. And whatever it was waiting for them. The train rattled forward, though the feeling of inertia seemed to fade with every passing second. Mia's breath came in shallow gasps, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching them. The oppressive silence inside the train was suffocating. No one spoke, but everyone shared the same haunted look, eyes wide, skin pale, and drenched in cold sweat. The older woman, now curled into herself on a seat, kept muttering incoherently under her breath. Mia could only catch fragments. "No escape. Shadows. It feeds on us." Her words only heightened Mia's anxiety. She had never believed in ghosts or anything supernatural, but now, trapped in this surreal, impossible subway, doubt began to creep into her mind. What if this wasn't just a malfunction or a hallucination? What if the train had truly taken them somewhere beyond reality? Suddenly, the young woman with headphones broke the silence. "We need to do something," she said, her voice shaking. "We can't just sit here and wait for whatever that was." Her eyes darted nervously toward the doors where the middle-aged man had fled. The echoes of his scream still seemed to hang in the air. Mia swallowed hard, trying to gather her thoughts. "We don't even know where we are," she replied, her voice unsteady. "Or what's out there?" The young woman looked around desperately. "We can't stay on this train forever. It's not taking us anywhere we want to go. Didn't you hear that scream? If we stay, we're all going to die." The others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their expressions torn between fear and uncertainty. The logic in the girl's words was undeniable, but none of them had the courage to face whatever lurked outside. Finally, a man sitting at the back of the car spoke up, a tall, muscular figure in his late 30s with a shaved head and tense posture. "We can't go out there blind," he said, his deep voice steady despite the tension. "We need a plan. We stick together, keep our eyes open, and don't panic. Whatever's out there, it's hunting us." Mia shivered at his words, but she nodded. "He's right," she added, summoning her strength. "If we leave the train, we need to do it carefully. There's safety in numbers." The others murmured in agreement, and slowly, hesitantly, they began to stand up. Mia's legs felt weak as she moved toward the door. Every instinct screamed at her to stay inside, to wait for rescue, but deep down she knew no one was coming. The train was leading them deeper into the unknown. With a trembling hand, Mia reached for the door control, expecting it to resist, but the doors slid open smoothly, revealing the eerie, decaying station once again. The thick fog still clung to the ground, swirling in slow, unnatural patterns, as though something unseen was moving within it. The air was cold and damp, carrying the scent of mold and rust. But there was something else, a low, distant whisper, like the wind but with words she couldn't quite make out. The muscular man, who introduced himself as Caleb, took the lead, stepping cautiously onto the platform. Mia followed closely behind, with the young woman and two others trailing. Only the older woman remained seated in the train, rocking back and forth, whispering to herself, "Don't leave her," Mia whispered to Caleb, glancing nervously back at the woman. Caleb shook his head. "If she's too far gone, there's nothing we can do for her right now. We have to focus on getting out of here." Mia felt a pang of guilt, but she couldn't argue. She turned her attention to the station itself, scanning for any signs of an exit. The walls were covered in strange, indecipherable symbols, much like the ones she'd noticed earlier. The air felt thicker here, almost as if it were alive, pressing down on them. They moved cautiously, every sound amplified in the oppressive silence. A distant thumping noise echoed through the tunnel, growing louder as if something was approaching. Mia's stomach churned as she realized it was the same sound they'd heard after the man's scream, the same deliberate, heavy footsteps. "We need to find a way out now," the young woman whispered urgently. Caleb gestured toward a dark corridor at the end of the platform. "There," he said. "It's the only way." The group hurried toward it, but as they neared the opening, a shadow moved in the fog. Mia froze, her eyes widening as a figure emerged. Another passenger, but he looked wrong. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes were wide and unblinking. His clothes were tattered, his face gaunt and stretched, as though he had been wandering here for years. "Help me," the man croaked, his voice a hollow rasp. "I can't get out. It won't let me leave." Mia felt a surge of dread. Who are you?" she stammered. The man stepped closer, his movements jerky and unnatural. "I've been here too long," he whispered. "It feeds on us, our fears, our mistakes. It keeps us here." Caleb raised his hand, motioning for the group to back away. "Stay back," he warned the man. But the figure stumbled forward, his expression twisted with desperation. "You can't escape. No one escapes. It's already too late for you." His voice rose in a shrill wail, echoing off the walls. Panic set in. The young woman screamed and bolted toward the corridor. Mia tried to follow, but the man grabbed her arm with icy fingers. "You'll see," he rasped. "You'll become like me, just like the rest of them." Mia wrenched herself free, her heart pounding in her ears. Caleb shoved the man aside and pulled Mia into the dark corridor. The others followed, their footsteps echoing as they ran. The fog seemed to thicken behind them, swallowing the station whole. As they fled deeper into the tunnel, Mia could hear the man's voice fading into the distance, his words haunting her. "It's waiting for you. In the darkness." The group slowed as they reached a fork in the tunnel. Caleb stopped to catch his breath, his face grim. "We have to keep moving," he said, his voice hoarse. "Whatever that thing is, it's not far behind." Mia nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere. The man's words echoed in her mind. "It feeds on us, our fears, our mistakes." She glanced at the others, wondering what secrets they were hiding, what nightmares this place was using against them. And then, as they stood in the darkness, she realized something chilling. The older woman's muttering had stopped. The silence after the old woman's muttering ceased was deafening. It pressed in on Mia and the others like the fog that clung to their legs, suffocating and thick. Mia's heart raced as she realized that the woman was no longer whispering on the train. Something had changed. Whether she had been taken by whatever was lurking in this nightmarish place or simply fallen silent from sheer terror, Mia didn't know. But she couldn't shake the feeling that the absence of sound was more sinister than anything they had encountered so far. "We need to choose a path," Caleb said, his voice breaking the silence, but there was a hint of hesitation now. He glanced down the two tunnels that forked in front of them, each vanishing into blackness. The young woman, whose name Mia still didn't know, clutched her arms tightly, glancing nervously between the tunnels. "How do we know which one is safe?" Caleb shook his head, frustration tightening his features. "We don't, but standing here makes us easy prey." A low, distant rumble echoed from the way they had come, as if something immense and ancient was shifting in the dark. The sound resonated through the ground, causing the group to stiffen in terror. "We don't have much time," Mia said, her voice barely above a whisper. Let's take the left." Caleb gave her a hard look but nodded, leading the way. Mia followed close behind, her senses on high alert. Every step felt like a descent into deeper madness, the walls of the tunnel closing in as the air grew colder. The further they went, the darker it became, until the dim light from the subway station seemed like a distant memory. "Keep your eyes open," Caleb whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of their footsteps. "Whatever that thing is, it could be anywhere." Mia's skin prickled as she scanned the darkness ahead, trying to make out shapes in the swirling fog. Her thoughts kept returning to the pale man on the platform, his hollow eyes, his desperate warning. It feeds on us, our fears, our mistakes. She couldn't shake the feeling that he had been right. The tunnel stretched on, a seemingly endless path with no sign of an exit. The walls were lined with strange markings, similar to those in the station, though now they seemed more intricate, almost alive. Mia could have sworn she saw them shift when she wasn't looking directly at them, as though they were writhing just beneath the surface. Suddenly, the young woman stumbled, letting out a yelp as she fell to the ground. Caleb rushed to help her, but as he did, the air around them grew heavier, colder. A deep, guttural sound rumbled from somewhere ahead, a low growl that reverberated through the tunnel. Mia froze, her breath catching in her throat. What was that? The young woman scrambled to her feet, her eyes wide with terror. "It's here. Whatever that thing is, it's here." Caleb stood, his face pale but determined. "We need to keep moving." But before they could take another step, the darkness ahead seemed to shift. A shadow emerged, slowly materializing out of the fog. At first it looked like a man, tall, hunched, but as it came closer, its true form became clearer. Its limbs were too long, its fingers sharp and claw-like. Its face was a hollow void, as if the features had been stretched and erased, leaving only darkness where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. The young woman let out a scream, and Caleb stepped forward to protect her, but the creature didn't attack. Instead, it stood there, its head tilting slightly as though observing them, studying their fear. Mia's mind raced, trying to comprehend what she was seeing. The thing seemed to exude an unnatural coldness, and though it made no sound, Mia could feel its presence deep in her bones. "It's feeding on us," she thought, "on our fear, on our helplessness." "Don't run," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It wants us to be afraid." But it was too late. The young woman bolted, her footsteps echoing wildly as she fled into the tunnel. Caleb cursed under his breath and took off after her, shouting for her to stop. Mia hesitated, torn between following and staying, but before she could decide, the creature moved. It didn't walk or run, but seemed to glide forward, its long limbs reaching out toward her. Mia stumbled backward, her heart pounding as panic surged through her. "It's playing with us," she realized. "This thing, it doesn't need to chase us. It wants to draw it out." In a split second of clarity, Mia turned and ran in the opposite direction, deeper into the tunnel. The air seemed to thicken as she ran, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. Behind her, the creature's presence loomed, always just at the edge of her perception, as though it could reach her at any moment, but chose not to. Ahead, she saw Caleb and the young woman, both frozen at a dead end. The tunnel had led them into a wide, circular chamber with no visible exit. The walls were lined with more of the shifting, writhing symbols, their shapes now clearly moving, twisting like living shadows. "We're trapped," the young woman whimpered, her voice cracking. Caleb slammed his fist against the wall in frustration. There has to be a way out. But Mia knew there wasn't. The symbols on the walls pulsed with a strange energy, and as she stared at them, a terrifying realization hit her. The symbols weren't just markings. They were alive. They were watching. The creature entered the chamber silently, its presence filling the space with a crushing weight. Mia felt her knees weaken, the air thick with dread. She turned to face it, her back pressed against the cold stone wall. "It feeds on us," she whispered. the pale man's words echoing in her mind. On our fears. The creature moved closer, its form towering over them, casting long, unnatural shadows on the floor. Mia's body trembled as it extended one of its long, clawed hands toward her. But as its fingers hovered just inches from her skin, something shifted in her mind. She wasn't going to die like this. She wasn't going to let this thing feed on her fear. In a burst of defiance, Mia forced herself to stand tall, pushing down the terror that threatened to consume her. "You can't have me," she whispered, her voice shaking but steady. "I'm not afraid of you." The creature paused, its form flickering slightly, as if confused by her sudden defiance. The shadows on the walls writhed violently, and for a moment, the air seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. Mia took a step forward, her eyes locked on the faceless void where the creature's head should have been. "You feed on fear, don't you? That's all you have." The creature recoiled, its body twisting and writhing as if in pain. The walls around them began to shake, and the fog swirled faster, thickening until it was impossible to see anything beyond a few feet. Caleb grabbed Mia's arm. "What are you doing?" "Ending this," she said, though she wasn't sure how. All she knew was that she had to face it, to refuse to give it the fear it craved. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature vanished, dissipating into the fog. The tunnel fell silent, and the oppressive weight in the air lifted. Mia, Caleb, and the young woman stood in the chamber, gasping for breath, trying to process what had just happened. "It's gone," the young woman whispered. "For now," Mia said, her voice steady. "But this place, it's still here." Caleb nodded grimly. "We have to find a way out before it comes back." They turned toward the tunnel, ready to continue their search for an exit. But as they moved forward, Mia couldn't shake the feeling that the creature wasn't truly gone. It was still watching, still waiting. And it wasn't finished with them yet.